Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden.
And I'm Christina Hoff-Summers. And I've been Twitter shamed. I had to delete a tweet.
Oh, not more Twitter.
It's a bad story.
No. We could, Zoe. We need an We keep promising to stage an intervention with your Twitter, because
I went off for the weekend. I went off for most of the weekend.
You had a Twitter Shabbat. That's good.
I had a Twitter Shabbat, and I'm going to do it again because it's actually addling my brain.
Well, it's obsessing you now, because think how many people are not on Twitter.
Well, I've got
and are not even.
I'm approaching 300,000 followers, so I have to. I like that.
Okay. What happened?
Well, we mentioned it in the last podcast where I was sort of.
You wrecked our chances to have a Femsplainer movie because you got a female director angry. So there go our chances for the big screen.
I think that was something else, but no, I made a bit of fun of Busy Phillips because she had this earnest video she posted about why women
should talk about their menstruation.
Periods and how liberating it would be. And I just wrote a little, I thought, humorous or light intended tweet where I said, something like busy men didn't get ahead in the world by talking about their bodily secretions. Anyway, somehow this got picked up by comedians, and they thought I was the church lady saying that men shouldn't talk about their farts or whatever.
Well, just that and this is the problem with Twitter, because people don't read humor or irony, and they just assume that you were being.
I got attacked.
That you were made uncomfortable by a woman talking about her menstruation. Not that, you know what? Don't talk about your menstruation. Nobody cares.
And I don't care if they're funny about it. But she wasn't even funny about it.
No, it was very earnest
and preaching.
Yeah.
But my tweet, if you hadn't seen hers and known what I was commenting, it did look preachy, and it did look.
So you're not taking it. You're now agreeing with them. You're stepping down.
You're stepping like down. The church lady, and I sent it to. I forgot I had sons, and anyway,
very briefly, boys, just very briefly.
So this comedian, Paul F. Tompkins. Have you heard of him?
No,
I don't know who he is, but I wrote to my son David. I said, I'm in trouble with Paul F. Tompkins. And he said, what did you do? He's funny. And I told him what I said, and he said, you do sound preachy. Anyway, I deleted the tweet, damn it.
Oh, I think you should never do that. I think you got to...
what? The honor? Like the Twitter honor?
Yeah, it's the Twitter honor.
I think deleting tweets is okay.
Deleting tweets?
You got bullied. You got bullied and shamed.
No, I didn't. Well, I thought I was wrong.
Like Tim Carney, who we've had on the podcast, has a huge Twitter following, like Christina, and he openly admits, he says he will put it out there. I delete tweets because he said, I think it's me learning from my mistakes and realizing that I've done something wrong. And he's like, it's become such a...
But Christina didn't do anything wrong.
Overserved the night before. I deleted all the tweets. Often by me. In fact, this tweet that got me in trouble was at your house at some party.
Yeah, you should. I would tell you not to tweet.
I'm not going to mention family members, but family members encouraged me.
But then if you're backing down on this, does this mean I can talk about periods? Because my big story of the week concerns periods. Men, you might want to tune out for...
You're letting them...
Just fast forward. Fast forward.
You know what?
We're unplugged.
I'm totally
this
with
topic is coursing out of us.
Yes, I'm with busy. And
spilling. I'm going to spill. I'm going to spill.
Flow.
Okay, from The Guardian. Are weed tampons the answer to period pain? That apparently they are creating CBD.
Cannabidiol.
CBD.
Cannabinoid, and it's or a
CBD vaginal suppositories.
Yeah.
They don't make you high, Christina, because they don't have the fun part of what you used to do when you were a hippie in the 70s.
Used to do? I want to know about edibles.
This is medical. And CBD...
Zoe's like...
We'll talk. CBD is they are finding... I mean, they're using it now treat PTSD. They're using it for pain. They're using it to offset anxiety. I actually had a talk with a doctor who's an anesthesiologist recently, and he was saying that our knowledge of these, what we're going to be able to do with things we used to just take psychedelically for fun, are really going to be transformative in how we treat mental health.
I never took it for fun. I took it for personal exploration.
Well, this will really help you with personal exploration because it's this apparently does actually, it melts, and it's I'm just reading from it's anti-inflammatory and pain relieving properties get to work. And so this intrepid journalist from The Guardian did try it, although she has to say, she said she thought she felt better after using it, but that could have had something to do with a large glass of medicinal wine I drank after. My kind of reporter. But
can you mix this cannabidiol
with wine? Yeah, because it's not like a...
It's not, it doesn't have the THC in it.
But can I just say, I was a pioneer on vaginal tampon medicinal experimentation.
Oh my God. Is it the vodka tampon? I thought we weren't going to tell the world.
Well, it's out there.
You already
I think I got
these reputation counselors whom we're going to interview in a minute.
Yeah. No, I got dared, and you shouldn't dare me to do things.
That's true.
Because I did. I was working at that time at the Huffington Post, and there were all these stories about young girls soaking their tampons in vodka and getting drunk. It was called the vodka tampon, and there were all these stories coming out like, is this true? Can you get drunk? But how are you going to be able to tell if you can or not?
Does it work with Cure Royale?
You have to try it, right? They can't. Yeah, so I took it upon myself in a scientific experiment to find out if you can get drunk. The pursuit of truth. And I lined up the tampons in vodka shot glasses. I had a regular tampon. I had a double. That's the heavy, for the heavy days. And first of all, have you ever, you can't reverse engineer a wet tampon.
Yeah, I was going to say, how would it work if you get it wet?
It's right.
Really
so
fast. Got to get it wet.
So there's already the sign that maybe this is a bit of an urban legend, but anyway, it can be done, and it hurts.
Oh, it burns.
It's horrible. It's like pouring lighter fluid in yourself.
Well, that's why I think of Cure Royale.
Well, I think it could cure. It could cure period pain by giving you
a yeast infection.
Terrible pain.
Well, that's what because they said that the CBD, that it dissolves inside you. A tampon has to be removed.
Well, no, but even they say like the alcohol soaked in it is enough to be absorbed into your system. But, maybe if you're 13, but you know what?
You didn't get high from it?
Nothing. No, I was like walking around with my legs crossed screaming.
Oh.
But nothing. And maybe my tolerance is higher. But anyway, I wrote about this. It's in the Huffington Post. You can Google my name and the Huffington Post. And I think if you Google my name, one of the first things that comes up is vodka tampons. I got ridiculed everywhere, media-eyed everywhere. But there was a lot of people who appreciated the fact that I think I'm in Snopes, that I put this theory to bed, as it were, once and for all. So that is my contribution to science, and I think these weed tampons or suppositories are probably actually real and will at least make you very relaxed while you have your period pain, if nothing else.
Well,
I don't know that they cure bloating, but... Anyway, so that's my story of the week.
Well, there's one more story that kind of concerns you.
Uh-oh. Hey, this one concerned me, and that was I've embarrassed myself minutes into the podcast.
But apparently Uber's going to throw people off the list. They will not be picked up if they have a low rating. And as we know, you've had a little trouble there.
It's not that low. I mean, I don't think. How low does it have to go before they? How low do you go until they?
Uber will now ban riders who receive low ratings from drivers, those with significantly below average scores, which was kind of you, Danielle.
No, I was 4.69 or something, which an Uber.
Too bad.
Well, an Uber driver did tell me it was bad, and I did. But here's what's happened, and which I'm actually quite proud of. Since he told me this, I have been working very, very hard to improve my Uber ratings.
I know, I've noticed. It's like a nightmare to be with you. You're so gracious. Oh, thank you so much. You were so wonderful.
My kids, I said, this is like some Larry David story where I'm trying to, but they said, my daughter said, no, Mom, it's much more Elaine from Seinfeld. and so, we went the wrong way. No problem. But I have to say that by really trying to be a better passenger, it makes me a better person. I now find anybody I deal with where I used to get, I think my low rating comes from if somebody is really incompetent or messing me up or whatever, I can be terse. And if they're rude, then look out. I will come back at them. And now, even when they're rude, I just go zen. It's like I have a CBD tampon, and I think I am. Nice. I'm becoming a better person. So thank you, low Uber rating, but don't throw me out as I'm
give her a chance.
As I'm coming to be a good passenger. I've learned my lesson.
And she's nicer to people, apparently.
Well, speaking about lessons, because maybe, as you said, I could use the help of our guest.
Reputation rehabilitator.
Oh, she's more than that. Our guest today is a woman called Hanna Stotland. And this sounds very banal. It says an independent educational consultant, but in crisis management. And she is like the Ghostbusters of help when your kid, probably a boy, when he gets accused, rightly or wrongly, of sexual misconduct.
Thrown out of Princeton
or, state U. This is the person that you go to. And she's
the fairy godmother.
Well, she helps you. She helps you not just rehabilitate yourself, but continue on in your education. And what is sort of fascinating about her is she herself, she's a brilliant woman, and you see her now. We watched interviews with her, and she herself went through an educational crisis. She didn't get thrown out of college, but she had some personal issues.
She had failing grades in high school.
And she wanted to come back, and she realized that there were so many people, and sometimes it's drug addiction, sometimes it's eating disorders, it's mental health issues, and more recently it's becoming these kids with sexual misconduct issues, and now maybe even admission testing scandals
or Uber driver
issues. But she is that person who comes in and, whether you're wrongly or rightly accused, will step in and be an advisor where other advisors fear to tread, because she believes that especially, a 19 or 20-year-old kid
gets a second chance
or deserves, if they haven't done something that's going to send them to jail, you can't destroy their life, and she tries to bring life back. So anyway, we're really excited to have her on, and
we love her. I love her. Hanna, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
Hi, Hanna. How are you? This is Danielle.
I'm great. Thank you so much. How are you?
Great. What does an educational consultant in crisis management drink when she's stressed out at the end of the day? What is your favorite cocktail?
So I'm a lightweight. So I tend to drink, if anything at all, I'll have a glass of Moscato or some cider.
Something sweet.
I like that.
Yes, exactly.
You might like Kir Royale.
We'll have to make.
Oh, I do like that. Yes. Anything involving Chambord sounds wonderful.
Well, when you come to D.C., I am making you a Kir Royale. Because you're in Chicago,
I would love
right?
that.
Yeah.
Well, tell us.
I am based in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us, just set up what you do, what your day is like. What are the cases that you are handling these days?
So I'm an educational consultant, and I specialize in crisis management. So most of my students have been expelled, suspended, arrested, sent to rehab, and they're trying to get into or back into higher education as they pick up the pieces of whatever that crisis was.
And when your phone rings and you see it's some out-of-state area code and you pick it up, what do you hear? Besides a telemark.
Well, pretty free. Yes, I always get those calls that look like they're coming from nearby.
Okay.
But yeah, so it is very common that I just pick up my phone and I just hear sobbing.
Wow.
And that is typically a mom whose kid just got expelled. Often for alleged sexual misconduct, but occasionally for substance abuse or something like that.
But would you say most of your, or a bulk of your cases now are about sexual misconduct?
So of my crisis management, of my special circumstances cases, yes, about half involve sexual misconduct. I do have a number of students who are survivors of sexual assault, as well as those who are accused of perpetrating it.
So, and is that a number that's grown? I mean, I think your first sexual misconduct case came to you in January 2014.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So yes, that has come up a great deal. Starting in 2015, I had this. The heavens opened, and I started seeing dozens of these cases.
And what caused the heavens to open?
I can't separate what is better communication on my part of the fact that I'm out here and that I have experience dealing with these cases. I can't separate that increased communication, increased visibility from an increasing need. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. So I suspect that both are going on.
I get a lot of letters because of the sort of writing that I do. I get a lot of letters from young men who feel they were wrongly accused, and they will tell me their story. And often these are, whatever went on, I never know for sure, of course. But what is clear to me is that these men, young men, are sort of psychologically annihilated and isolated and terrified. And I don't know that people fully appreciate what it's like to be a pariah accused of sexual assault. And stipulate, I don't have sympathy for anyone who commits sexual assault. However, on our campuses, increasingly you find the definition has expanded to include someone who had sex, two people had sex when they're drunk, or even increasingly young women who felt that they later had sex, but they really didn't want it, and they now feel that's a violation. Do you get cases like that where the young man has been accused?
Yes. Most of them occupy a gray area, and I do have a portion of my cases, a fraction, involve allegations that anyone would agree that, if true, these allegations would constitute sexual assault. But more of the cases reflect fact patterns, and again, taking the allegations as true, that not everyone would agree is sexual assault, that I don't always feel is sexual assault. But of course, my students have to follow the rules of the school where they are enrolled. whether they agree with them or not, and in some cases when they failed to understand or appreciate them fully. But yes, there are a lot of very ambiguous allegations, as well as allegations of where the allegations are of unambiguously wrong conduct, but where the evidence is mixed or sometimes exculpatory, and that's an area that I think people don't necessarily appreciate, is that the college tribunals are not necessarily truth-seeking or well-designed truth-seeking processes, and that, you know, in a sense, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? We had 1,000 years of patriarchy where allegations of sexual assault either were not recognized at all or were swept under the rug. And that was really in service of protecting institutions. And to an extent, that hasn't changed. I mean, first of all, some of that still happens, right? None of that is erased by some overreaching in the other direction. You know, we still live with a culture where some survivors are silenced, where I think rape culture is a real thing, and we saw it, for example, in Steubenville. And at the same time, the more things change, the more they stay the same, in the sense that institutions are still acting in what they perceive as their own interests. It's just that sometimes they may perceive it as in their interest to sort of get rid of everyone who's accused.
Well,
the opposite of sweeping this under the rug is not necessarily seeking the truth in every case, but saying, let's get rid of this in a different direction.
I think that's a very important point, that the institutions, in a certain sense, haven't changed. They're looking out for themselves. They get their lawyers, and then they hire the bureaucrats to protect the institution. In the old days, it might have meant sweeping allegations under the rug, and now it means the sheer, hint of a young man or sometimes young women having violated the Title IX. You just throw them out of the school and dispense with due process. What
you mentioned Steubenville, which was that case, Hanna? Maybe you could just give us an example.
This is a few years back. This was
those were high school
football players in Ohio, where they had videotaped themselves. I believe digitally penetrating an underage young.
Oh yes.
And the community was very hostile to her.
Yes.
And there was a lot of very explicit statements of, well, you deserve it and you're a tramp anyway, and why were you that drunk? And, that's still in our culture too. That's not gone.
Okay, so you have obviously, that's bad. Steubenville is bad. But with Title IX, and you talked about these, maybe explain what Title IX has done, how it's changed how these colleges deal with these potential sexually assault cases, and are you seeing more cases where it's not like Steubenville, but these are boys who are now in a he said, she said, alcohol's involved, and as Christina said, and it's now in the college's interest not really to care, just to shut it down, get rid of it.
Get rid of him.
Right. So what changed in Title IX enforcement was in 2011, the Department of Education issued a Dear Colleague letter. This set off the series of events that led to now the proposed revision of Department of Education regulations under Betsy DeVos, which is, of course, highly controversial. But what changed in the Dear Colleague letter, which was sent to all the institutions that accept federal funding, which is essentially all of them, and which was designed to address a perceived lack of enforcement or lack of vigor in institutions stamping out sexual assault and harassment on their campuses. And prior to 2011, that wasn't the first time that institutions were understood to be in violation of federal anti-discrimination standards if they permitted rampant harassment and assault to take place on their campuses without consequence. But this was meant to shift the balance of enforcement mechanisms more in favor of complainants.
Mm-hmm.
And
because since the 90s, at least, there's always, there's been heightened, rape awareness, counseling on colleges. So this, I'm just trying to get to the shift that this brought about.
So this was really about the balancing of punishments, of investigations and punishments, so that, for example, the Dear Colleague letter required that any tribunal or process that is investigating a sexual misconduct allegation, that those had to be weighed under a preponderance of the evidence standard as opposed to the clear and convincing standard that was previously commonly used in many colleges. So in other words, made it easier to meet the burden of proof in an accusation of sexual misconduct.
And it said very little about the importance of the presumption of innocence or offering due process to the accused, right?
Right. So I certainly see a problem in how it was implemented following 2011, in that there was a lot of instruction to the people conducting these. And I want to stress, we're not talking about something that looks like a civil trial, much less a criminal trial. We're talking about often panels of faculty and students who may be fantastic at their jobs as math professors or deans of admission or whatever their main job may be, but who are not particularly well-trained or expert in investigating what amount to violent felony accusations, even though the school, the most severe penalty that the school can give is expulsion. But we have this supposition that, or at least I used to, that there would be neutral expert professionals trying to figure out what happened in a given case. And for the most part, that isn't true. They're usually not professional mediators or retired judges or people from law enforcement. And they are not necessarily neutral. They are aligned with the institution and may bring their own biases to the table, as of course judges may as well, but who also may have been instructed, for example, to essentially believe victims. That if someone says, I was victimized and here's how, that even that person who is in a decision-making role should take the complainant's word in a way that I think is appropriate if you are someone's doctor, if you are their teacher, if you are their friend, and they come to you and say, I was assaulted. Of course, believe them. Absolutely believe them. Offer love and support. If your job is to try and figure out what the truth is, then you should be doing that job, which is not necessarily consistent with believing anybody on the face of their statements, as opposed to looking at all the evidence in context.
Absolutely. And you know what I found dismaying about the letter, the Russell and Ali letter to the colleges, was that they were, under Title IX, they were instructed by the Department of Education in the Dear Colleague letter that in cases of sexual assault, that mediation was not appropriate, even on a voluntary basis. Mm-hmm. And a lot of deans and Title IX officers and so protested and said that was our, very effective, because you could typically, if you are trying to adjudicate, an alcohol, confusing hookup of undergraduates, and then someone feels bad. Maybe somebody was bad, it's quite likely they were, morally, ethically. So you have mediation, you sort it out. Maybe someone has to go for alcohol counseling or someone has to apologize. It used to be the case that college administrators could do that. And maybe it wasn't 100% successful, but that was the way it worked, and mostly it was effective. They are not allowed to do that, according to the Dear Colleague letter. Everything has to become like a federal case, and they have these extrajudicial.
Well, except with not the same levels, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hanna, not the same levels of evidence or,
No, people say, oh, well, it's the same evidence in civil trials. It's preponderance of evidence. In a civil trial, though, you have the right to an attorney. You have a right to question your accuser. There are all sorts of rules. These kids go into these procedures. And it's not only boys. Some girls now are getting accused, and it's awful. And your entire life is ruined, and you have a very hard time even getting into college again. Because in some schools it'll be part of your permanent record, and schools won't take you. But that's where Hanna comes in. Parents of these students will call her,
crying.
And she can help rehabilitate their reputation.
So tell us about that, Hanna, because give us some example of typical cases that you're having. Maybe have they changed? As you say, you're getting more, but maybe that's just because more people are aware of your business card with an emergency break glass. So tell us about how typical cases, and then have you seen any change more recently from when you first began getting these cases?
Patterns have not changed recently. Most of my cases fall into one of two categories. So about 1/3 arise from serious relationships by college standards. So let's say a relationship of months or longer. And typically in this group, there is some kind of catastrophic breakup that happens. Often involving some undisputed bad behavior on the part, usually of the accused to students. So we're talking about he dumped her by text. He slept with her best friend. He's caught cheating, something like that. Sometimes her mom or her boyfriend back home found out that this relationship was happening in college, and there is a huge catastrophic kind of teenage drama breakup that divides the freshman dorm floor into factions, that kind of thing. And then there is an accusation following that breakup that one of the many sexual encounters that happened during the relationship was non-consensual, which may be true. But that's the context of the accusation. About 2/3 of the cases that I see can broadly be described as drunken hookups, where folks either were acquaintances or buddies, or perhaps met the night of the incident, and there was a hookup. The majority of my cases do not involve allegations of intercourse. It's more commonly allegations of sexual touching and/or oral sex. So in a typical case,
performed by the girl.
Pardon me?
Performed by the girl upon the man?
Very frequently.
Yeah.
Sometimes mutual.
Yeah.
And very frequently, let's say 80-90% of these cases involve alcohol overuse. And very frequently, in either category of cases, we often have a situation where some months later, we're trying to quantify the level of drunkenness of one or both parties based on their recollection, based on text messages or IMs that may have been exchanged, and the memory of other drunken party goers. months later.
No, just stop right there. I'm just sorry, but to me, this is so insane that 2 months later, they're going to ask to have some kind of formal adjudication of a drunken hookup that, initially the person didn't complain about. Sometimes they even have friendly texts and so forth. But then in retrospect, a few months, I've seen these cases a year and a half later, and they will be charged. And I think it's frightening. I mean, I'm a mother of sons, so it frightens me. You have daughters.
I have daughters,
but you
two
have
daughters and a son. Well, what it sounds to me, though, Hanna, is it's like everything you describe, we're all on the same page. We don't even really have to say this, but we all agree that if a woman doesn't matter how drunk she is or he is, if an assault takes place, if she is forced to have sex or do things against her will, and it's pretty clear there's evidence that this happened and she told people at the same time. Like, I think we all agree that that's, it's important that victim see justice or is taken care of. But what we're talking about is it's like everything you describe, including breakups that, don't go as one would have hoped, parents objecting, forcing kids to break up, getting into these kind of situations. I mean, this is young, has been young romantic life since the beginning of time. But now we're trying to adjudicate it. And there's also probably...
And these apparatchiks, officers and sex tribunals.
Right.
Involved.
But what Hanna says is, I think, a really important point. But there's way more alcohol now involved. And maybe... Correct me again, Hanna, if this is, and less rules of engagement, as it were, between the sexes. What are you seeing between these young men and women when you've got someone rightly or wrongly accused that? What is taking place between these young men and women on college campuses?
Well, there's a lot of sexual contact that happens when one or both parties are drunk. And or at least drinking, and the exact level of drunkenness is hard to establish. It is relatively rare. It does happen. It's relatively rare that I see cases where there is an allegation. Either I believe that I was unconscious at the time of this sexual contact, or allegations of force, or even allegations I said no and he didn't stop.
Right.
I do see cases like that, but most of the cases involve, I know that I acted like a willing participant, but I was too drunk to make that decision at that time. And we end up with, among the various unintended consequences here, is you end up with something like a race to the courthouse. Because if parties wake up in the morning and find, last night was a drunken hookup, the one to file the first complaint with the school will have quite an advantage.
So you mean if the man?
Well, a woman could do it too, but I once was in a debate about these changes to Title IX at the University of Virginia, and I asked the professor if she thought that, because she did think that drunken sex was a form of sexual assault, and I said, of course I agreed if the person was unconscious or, staggering and, beyond, but normal drunkenness, I said, but then can two people rape each other? And she said, yes.
Well, is that the case? I mean, are you saying the man in this case, and you talk about it, is primarily these accused are the men, is his judgment, he gets no slack cut for him might not having the best judgment and missing the cue. So tell us what happens. Take us through. So let's say that that's the case that washes up on your doorstep. What happens, and what happens to the accused? I mean, especially if he's found guilty. Take us through that a little bit.
So typically there will be some kind of investigatory process, sometimes by a single investigator whose job it is both to conduct, interview all the witnesses, decide what evidence is relevant, and to render a decision. That's called the single investigator model. Sometimes both parties, it's a little bit more adversarial, where each party can involve its own attorneys. Now, typically, these attorneys can advise the student, but if there is a hearing, they can't speak. Sometimes students are permitted to see the evidence against them. Sometimes they're not, or sometimes I have to put air quotes around the idea of seeing the evidence against you. What that often means is sending an 18 or 19-year-old student into a room with the record, meaning, the statements of other witnesses and so on, and they will have an hour or so to look at them alone, and they cannot take notes, take pictures, or bring copies home, or show them to parents or lawyers. And that's what passes for seeing the evidence against you and preparing your defense. What happens after discipline, if a student is suspended or expelled, a very common consequence is to be suspended until the complainant graduates, which maybe 3.5 years. If the complainant is a freshman, or they can be expelled. And these are, I would have said it up until about 2 months ago, they are the most difficult to place candidates in admission in America. They are absolutely radioactive. Now I have 4 families from the big criminal national admissions fraud scandal, and those students are going to be even harder to place, but
are you handling those, Hannah? Oh, we got to get to those.
Yeah, but let's get to those.
Yeah.
I just want to
so far, so we'll see. But the students who have been found responsible for sexual assault or for any kind of sexual misconduct, regardless both of the severity of the alleged conduct and regardless of how much confidence we can really have in that outcome. I mean, this is the separate question, right? There's a spectrum of severity of an allegation. Whether someone is being accused of an unwelcome hug, which I have seen a case like that, versus, gang rape of an unconscious person, which, should send you to jail for life.
Yeah.
So we have both that spectrum of severity of the allegation, and there's a spectrum of certainty, where how strong is the evidence that this occurred as written or as accused. And I think we have some easy cases where it's clear that someone committed terrible conduct, in which case, expulsion is the least of what ought to happen to them. They ought to spend their lives in jail. But we also have many, many cases where it's not really knowable. Not only not known, but not knowable. Just how drunk was this person at that moment on that night? And were they, incoherent and unable to look after themselves and to speak up in their own for their wants and needs? It's not knowable. And so you have students who are very, very difficult to place in other universities. And I don't just mean if you're coming from Princeton, you're not going to get into another Princeton. I mean, that's true. But typically, if I have a student who has, assuming an academically successful student would otherwise be a strong transfer candidate, and they are expelled for sexual misconduct, which may or may not have occurred, I usually encourage them to apply to about 30 schools. And I am very happy if they get into 3 to 5 of those.
I have a question about the whole thing, because there was an article recently in the Atlantic by Connor. I can never.
Connor Friedersdorf. Yeah.
Say it.
Connor Friedersdorf.
And it was about Princeton University, and some students were protesting their Title IX policies and claiming that there was an epidemic of sexual assault at Princeton. I have reasons to doubt that, but never mind that. They wanted, among their demands, they wanted Princeton to bring in a team of, beyond their Title IX officers, they wanted a team of social workers. They wanted a team of international litigation experts for students who were traveling abroad or on a junior year abroad program. In the end, it would be millions and millions of dollars and time and effort devoted to addressing this scourge of sexual assault at Princeton, which people have claimed hasn't changed for years, no matter what the studies show. You know, they do these sort of advocacy studies and show 1 in 5, 1 in 4, never changes, no matter what. So whatever they're doing, it's not solving the problem. Or these, I doubt these studies, so I don't think the problem was ever what they claimed it was. But part of me is just thinking, this is insane. This is a contagion of hysteria. And I see no end to it. And and I know you don't want to take a strong stand on that because there are serious cases and one risks trivializing them by questioning the whole thing. But to me, the whole thing looks a little bit like madness.
Well, it certainly worries me that there's an idea that not just that there is danger, which of course is true.
That's true everywhere.
But that essentially that we shouldn't be sending daughters off to college practically. I think certainly I wouldn't recommend any parent of daughters to send them to college if it were really 1 in 3 or whatever. The challenge is that according to RAINN, which the RAINN, which is a survivors advocacy organization, college-age women not in college are actually at greater risk of sexual assault than college-age women in college.
Oh, absolutely.
So there's actually some protective effect of being in college, or perhaps of being a middle-class white person, which is, who most reliably goes to college. And one of the many problematic issues, I think, around the campus outcry is that there isn't any concern that I can find for the young women working at Wendy's.
Right. Right. And I've heard you.
Organizations are at greater risk.
I've heard you say this, and what you do is people say to you, "Oh my God, you're helping these young men get back into, an elite college or a 4-year college. Yes. That's terrible." And to which you respond, and what do you say?
And I'd say, well, these are folks who are going to be in the community. Are you not concerned if they're working at Wendy's and perhaps attacking women there? Now, I don't necessarily see that, but that at least would be a reasonable concern. But there seems to be this idea that if you remove the alleged predator from the college environment, then everybody who matters is safe. And we are not talking about people who are going to be going to jail. Because for the most part, these students, usually there is no police involvement at all. If there is police involvement, typically charges don't stick
they look at the charges and they can't take them seriously. Oh, well.
That also happens. But one way or another, these young men who are accused are going to be in the community. And the only options we have are to have them in the community educated or in the community ignorant. There is not a third option where we put them on a rocket to Mars and never have to interact with them again.
Although some would like that option, I think, though, Hanna. But you touch on something, because if these were assault as the law understands assault, why wouldn't you just get the police involved? Why do you have these tribunals? Extrajudicial tribunals. And I think you've also mentioned that in other interviews that it is primarily a white problem, that other, I think, minority or ethnic groups on campuses are not drinking to the level. Am I right?
However, a lot of
that's right.
A lot of men of color get accused.
Yeah. So men of color certainly are getting accused. and it's not that they don't drink, especially when they are at residential colleges that have high rates of alcohol abuse. But it is true that the conflation of regular drunkenness with a good college experience is a white middle-class phenomenon, and that students of color and first-generation students binge drink at much lower rates than upper middle-class white students.
And are they primarily your defendants, as it were?
Yes, most of them. Certainly not all of them, but very frequently you are seeing the alcohol abusing population are highly represented in the population, both of complainants and of respondents. And I also want to bring up that although Title IX is set up, it is a federal law banning discrimination on the basis of sex. But about 10% of the cases that I see are same-sex accusations. Mm-hmm. And most of them are men accusing men. People of all genders accuse men. Very few people accuse women, although it does happen. And so I see cases arising from same-sex encounters, from multi-party encounters, not infrequently.
We didn't agree to that orgy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, at one point you were interviewed. Again, I think it was on the radio program, Radio Lab, WNYC Studios, and there was a young woman, Caitlin Priest, who was sort of surprised by what you were saying, and she kept saying that if a woman feels violated, then she was violated. And she thought that it was completely up to the person who makes the accusation. Anybody that was unhappy with the sexuality. And I listened to the prior tape with her on Radiolab where she'd gone and confronted a boyfriend, or it was like a friend without benefits. And then then he came over and they were drunk, and then he sort of argued with her a little bit, and then she consented. And then the next day she thought, well, I really didn't consent, and he should have known that. And now there's a whole movement among rape crisis activists to say that even consent isn't consent because women can be coerced into consent.
Do you see that, Hanna, happening?
Absolutely. And there's a poster that I took a picture of in dorm rooms in Texas and in Florida, or rather on dorm public area hallway bulletin boards in Texas and in Florida in the same month when I was doing college tours, that said, if you have to convince them, it's not consent. And the idea that all convincing is coercion is quite a robust one nowadays on college campuses. It's not something I agree with.
But wait a minute. If you have to convince them, it's not consent. Danielle, I accuse you, j'accuse, of kidnapping me because I often don't want to go out. You say,
no, it goes back to the Christmas Carol. I really can't stay. Christmas song. But Hanna, I think, and I want to stress, and I think you would stress this yourself. You consider yourself a strong feminist. And
absolutely.
And what I have heard you say is that when you're representing, when you are criticized for taking on these cases, like how, as Christina said, how can you represent a man who's in this situation? I think the criticism behind that is that how can you represent a man at all? Because even if this particular male isn't maybe guilty of something egregious, deserving expulsion, it's what you said originally about the patriarchy. But men are guilty or have been guilty and have gone, done what they want in the past. So this is kind of almost like reparations against, young men today, except as you point out, these are real lives. And tell us about some of the lives, that have been changed or ruined.
Right. And I always, when I'm talking to a family, I want to encourage them to see this as a survivable catastrophe, because it is. And it can be both of those things. But that at a bare minimum, we're going to have a serious interruption in the education. There is often, I have a fair number of cases where there's, I'm starting to work with the young person after they get out of the mental hospital, following often a period of suicidality that is connected to the public shaming. And it is, I've been very troubled by schools tolerating a lot of harassment, some of which rises, in my view, to the level of stalking, but where if the harasser is earnest in the belief that the student they're targeting committed sexual assault, then the school will tolerate it. So there was an example at the University of Chicago where a student had an academic performance. It was the thesis show for a theater major, and picketers showed up with signs saying, with the student's name saying, John Smith is a rapist. Which, again, I don't know that it isn't true. It may be true, but the picketers don't know that for sure either.
We have a name for that. It's vigilantism.
Right, and that schools should not be permitting students to be hounded off campus without some assurance that that they committed the acts that they're accused of, and we just don't know. And in the absence of knowing, we can't allow, or we certainly should not allow, the campus environment to become a place where the student cannot safely live. And you are not safe if people are announcing John Smith is a rapist. That defamation, if you will, is not okay on campuses under any other circumstances. And yet in this environment, that's tolerated, and I think it's wrong.
Do you tell the accused, I mean, obviously it depends on what they did or what the perception is what they did, but do you tell them if you feel that they're being misrepresented to really fight it? Because there was, I think, earlier on a view that, look, you just admit to something, snip it in the bud, and this is what we just saw happen with this court decision in Michigan, where a young man admitted to being drunk, didn't admit to assaulting, but was given no representation, and he thought he said, "Yeah, well, I'll just admit to being drunk and have an encounter." And then he got expelled anyway for these kind of admissions. And now the judge is saying that they have to have representation or be informed of what could happen to them.
So many of my students, if they are still involved in the disciplinary process, they have lawyers. So I'm a lawyer by training, but I don't practice law. And so I often am collaborating with lawyers who are advising the students as to, what amounts to litigation strategy. It's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. When it comes to students who have been outed on campus, if it's written in chalk on the campus sidewalks, John Smith is a rapist, and most people are not named John Smith, and we really know who that is. You may have to get off campus. It doesn't necessarily matter, whether you can prove that this is false. If that's out in the world, you probably can't be at that school anymore, and you need to leave voluntarily if they don't kick you out. I mean, you can't be there in that environment. And
that's absolutely terrifying. I mean, to say that about the United States of America, that people can be driven out by anonymous complaints things written on sidewalks?
Well, before you go, Hanna, you did, we don't want to run over our time with you, but just tell us quickly, what are you advising the admission scandal families to do, if you can say? I mean, what happens when, and some of these kids presumably knew about it or didn't know about it, but that's a kind of crisis management situation to be taking on.
Boy, is it. So I'm working with them on trying to find an educational path forward, and the different families are situated quite differently and have, and each student has different academic goals. If they want to go to college abroad, they can do that. They don't even necessarily need my help. I mean, the schools in the UK will not care about this.
Huh. That's any reason why? Are they just slacker or less excitable? Or
completely different admissions philosophy in most of the world than it is in the U.S. The U.S. idea that, we're building a community and we're going to look into your character and write an essay that bears your soul and stuff like that, they think we're nuts in the rest of the world. Not everybody wants to go abroad, and especially not when the family is in the midst of a crisis and mom and dad are maybe going to jail.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the right moment for every family, for the kids to, be 5,000 miles away. So for staying in the U.S., they're going to have to tell their stories and talk about how they have changed as a result of going through this trial by fire that they're having right now. And I do find that there are some admissions deans out there who are listening, particularly to the idea that even picturing the most culpable students, right, ones who participated in the fraud, taking the allegations in the complaint as true. If so, these students who did wrong, if they did wrong, did so at the direction of both parents when they were 16 or 17 years old, and that the potential for moral growth in someone who made a bad decision under those circumstances may still be there. Mm-hmm. That I think it is relatively rare that if you have a 16 or 17-year-old, mom and dad sit them down and say, Junior, this is, we have found a path for you, and we hired the best guy in the business to help us. Here's what we're going to do. How many teenagers living under their parents' roof are going to say, no, Mom, you are guiding me into an ethical quagmire. This is wrong. Right? You're learning right and wrong from your parents. Yeah. And if your parents make a wrong choice and tell you to follow them, I think most kids will. And that doesn't
But I can't row.
Tell you.
But I can't row, Mom. I don't know how to row.
Right. So I think a lot of people in higher education who have seen a lot of teenagers make a lot of bad mistakes might still think a person is educable despite having made this wrong choice.
Yep.
And you might learn from this, particularly as here you have this gigantic national public humiliation happening. You have your parents perhaps losing their careers and or going to jail. This is not a consequence they're going to forget.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to go back to.
That's a story I would want to help them tell.
Yes, and that's very fair and plausible. I think many people feel for the kids caught in this.
But I want to go back to the young men and some women caught up in this college bureaucracy, kangaroo court nightmare. And I hear about these cases of young men wrongly accused and some young women, and I can't help but think of Emile Zola. In 1898, he published this letter in the newspaper J'accuse, in which he documented the outrageous miscarriage of justice, and we know this is the l'affaire Dreyfus, the Dreyfus affair. And his letter documenting this outrageous unfairness and injustice and deception and every kind of malfeasance against Dreyfus His letter provoked an examination of conscience in France. And Hanna, you are so bright, and you have a front row seat to this complete travesty of in miscarriage of justice. I wish that you would write j'accuse. That's all.
I say, well, she's doing better. She's performing the
She's providing CPR for people who are caught up in it.
Yeah.
But I see in her the capacity to write, to be our Emile Zola. We needed Emily Zola.
All right, Emily Zola. Hanna, thank you so much for coming on and explaining this to us, and for doing what you're doing and taking on kids who maybe deserve some of these charges, but you have compassion. And
maybe she can help you with your problems with Uber.
Oh, I have a bad Uber rating, Hanna. Maybe we'll talk about it later.
Uber passengers
well,
with low ratings.
Definitely owe one another a drink later. And, I have 10 more hours of stories I could tell. I love my work very much, and I love talking about it, and I love that I get to grapple with these hard problems.
Well, come and see us in D.C. And we'll
come and see us the next time you're in D.C., Emily Zola.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hanna. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I'm so impressed with her.
Well, you are, I think, as the mother of two boys, that you do really think of it from their perspective and how easily their lives might have been ruined by a single...
Well, you're a mother of two girls, but you have a son. Imagine the way the young women are defining sexual assault these days. It includes just a confusing date, a confusing hookup.
Well, Nat, my son, in fact, he's been on to mansplain about, his experience at Swarthmore, and how most young men, I think, are just avoiding anything that could be considered contact, including hello and goodbye with women. But also, I think the point that she made, and I think Emily Yoffe has made it before, we've talked about this, the amount of alcohol that is coursing through those systems is such a problem, and drug, and of course they're combining it with drugs.
About stopping all sorts of horrible things that can go wrong, they should clamp down on alcohol abuse. But they
right. I mean, in fact, at some colleges, it's sort of tacitly agreed that the college will let you have alcohol at a frat house or, where they're having a party space, and they won't, enforce the rules. And in some cases, and as my son told me that, he was in a frat at Swarthmore. They've since been shut down. But there's a story behind that. But, they have designated brothers or students who make sure they protect the men and the women at the parties, and just make sure they get rides home. And
the idea that at Swarthmore, there's this whole protection bureaucracy, and everybody's at risk, and they're being so ludicrous.
Well, it's so toddler-like. You'd think,
I was going to say there's one of my friends is the chair of this particular position for her sorority, and I went to American for undergrad, and they normally require the sororities on campus to get, a drug and alcohol protective training. But she asked my advice on what she thinks I would do if I were in the situation where I was teaching all these women how to protect themselves. And I said, self-defense.
Yes.
I said, bring in a self-defense person.
No, that one that I talked about and got screamed at in
And she
Australia.
thought it was such a good idea. And I also mentioned, I said, you should also think about the fact that college girls now use Uber and Lyft all the time. And the statistics of the amount of women that are getting kidnapped and attacked in Ubers and Lyft.
Or getting into the wrong
Right. And so I said,
the wrong car.
You can get training now on how to make sure a child lock is not on when you get into an Uber and, going through all of that.
But that, again, I'm sorry, that implies sobriety.
Right.
And self-defense, that's the problem. They're not in the situation. I remember driving home. I think I was probably with you one night. I was driving home from dinner, and it was quite late. Well, it wasn't dinner. It was somewhere, but it was late for us. It was like 8 o'clock. No. It was, we were driving home, and there was a woman wandering the streets. She was a very respectable looking young woman.
I remember that.
And I pulled over and I said, "Where are you going?" And she was like so wasted. And I said, "Let me take you home." And she came in the car, which I guess I don't look so scary. But even that, it alarmed me that she would so readily get in a car. And I asked her where she was going, and she directed me to a house. And I walked her up to the door, and there was clearly some party. There's some young men looking out. And I was very reluctant to leave her there, but they seemed to all know each other. And they looked at me like I was some crazy, person. And I just said, you better take care of her because she's not in a good state right now. And that's how it left. But I mean, come on, you can't. I mean, this is really the problem.
Well, you're not allowed to say it, and you're going to be. If this gets out and it gets on Twitter, you're going to have to delete what you just said.
Well, no, I'm saying the self-defense won't work because you're just. Although I pack a really good punch when I'm drunk, I think.
I don't even want to get into it because there's nothing but trouble there. But what there's
so my husband says. All right. Well, we don't have much time, so let's do some quick listener reaction.
Sounds good.
From courtesy of Zoe.
So I don't have a name for this first one because it came from a Twitter DM, I think.
Oh, yes.
So I'm not totally sure our name. But both of these were in reference to our episode last week about blissfully blended.
Or unblissfully blended with Rebecca Eckler.
Yes. So this first one says, "You guys should probably edit out your rant about vocal fry because your guest in that episode had it. I dislike vocal fry too, but it seems rude, and I know it's not supposed to be. It might be taken badly by some people. Still a great episode."
Well, first of all, thank you. First of all, for that part. First of all, I don't think Rebecca, I wasn't aware of her having vocal fry.
I wasn't either.
I wasn't.
Wait, I got to do my...
I don't think it was Busy Phillips level.
It wasn't Busy Phillips. And she was...
Phillips. But I forget how to do vocal fry.
Well, now you're being rude, but now you know how has it and had a successful career. So maybe this listener is right. Diane Rehm of NPR.
Well, that's not fair. She
was older. Okay, so to those of you who feel unfairly shamed by our remarks on vocal fry, I take your
elocution.
No, I'm going to say I'm sorry. I'm going to say I'm sorry following your Twitter deletion and my trying to be a better Uber passenger.
No, I only deleted it because I was misinterpreted, not because I was wrong. I stand by that tweet.
But if we're shaming and all we're shaming are people with vocal fry, then we can't be that bad.
I think you're right.
I don't know. What's the next listener reaction?
What's the next question?
Zoe.
Read it with vocal fry. No.
No, please. No.
No more vocal
No more. This joke's dead. We've killed this joke.
Killed it. Okay. Dear Femsplainers, this is from Tony. I just finished Blissfully Blended, and it really hit home for me as I was raised in a household where my mother always moved in with men as soon as she could into their home. My sister and I were quite charming, and I figured she wanted to use us to lure a man into marriage. We had about 4 different men live with us between 6 months to a year or two before my mother finally got one to marry her. By the time we had a, quote, legal stepfather, we were so emotionally drained that my sister and I both refused to form a bond with him. We figured he would be gone any day, but he ended up married to my mother for around 8 years. When they divorced, I never contacted my stepdad of 8 years, and I'm sad about it because he was actually a good man. He deserved my love. I was just truly unable to give it to him. I have been happily married myself for 8 years, but I have promised myself that if it ever ends in divorce, I will never introduce a man to my children unless I am certain that we both want to get married. Your podcast always makes my day, and I plan on donating money to your Patreon as soon as I can. Love, Tony.
Oh, well, thank you, Tony.
Well, what a
Sweet and sad.
astute.
And sad. Poignant.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, although I was taking the fact that the kids were so charming that the mother would sort of hold them out there as kind of bait.
Like, I think I'm going to use Tamler and Dave.
They're a little old.
Oh, look, he has a podcast.
Yeah,
Isn't
like
that
Very Mad
cool?
Wizard.
It's a very big podcast. Yeah, no, but that's very poignant. But that's the last one, right, Zoe?
Yeah.
That's for this week. But to your point, Tony, about donating to Patreon or We Gather, please do.
If you'd like the Femsplainers and you want to keep it going, we need help.
We need help, and we're not ashamed to ask.
You know, Danielle, since you said that people should never dare you to do things, I think that should be a level of Patreon where if you pay a certain amount, you dare Danielle to do something.
Okay.
No, she'll do it.
If you guys donate, let's say, $10 or $15 a month, like
Didn't you go to a restaurant recently and eat like?
Oh, I ate ant larvae.
Oh.
I'll tell you what. If you donate to Patreon or We Gather, they're both patreon.com, wegather.com, and as I like to say, as a listener noted, backsplash.
Yeah, I didn't want to correct you when I heard that.
Backsplash.
Backsplash. Femsplainers on both sites. You can send me a note, and if it seems like a plausible dare, truth or dare. No, we've done that. We've done that. We can't do more than that. But I'll consider it. Christina and Zoe you'll be the judges, and you'll make sure that it's done, and we'll video it. So bring it on. This is what we've sunk to keep our podcast going, but we really need this support.
Anything.
Well, not anything.
Almost. I've been there.
All right. Well, thank you for joining.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Stay with us by following us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. You can always email questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com. We read every one.
We record at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., and thanks to AEI Research Assistant Zoe Appler, who is our production assistant here in the studio, and thanks to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor, and occasional millennial mansplainer.
And listen to us on pretty much any of your favorite podcast platforms. And please remember to subscribe and like us at iTunes if possible. Every like helps us keep our solid 5-star rating. Cheers.